Okay, everybody, so let's get started. We'll go to the next part. So for those of you who have been here for the first session, thank you for staying. For those of you who have joined us, you're very welcome. So what we're going to do now for the next 45 minutes to an hour is give you a chance to hear from an industry professional. So somebody who has worked in the creative and cultural industries. We're very lucky that Lisa works here now with us in the university, but she has a really sort of established career in the creative and cultural sector, which she can give you loads of advice about. So her little biography is, as she gave me here. So join Lisa as she shares insights and stories about the importance of determination, curiosity, and learning from the wrong turns and mistakes which shaped her throughout a transatlantic career, which has seen her working for key cultural organisations including the Edinburgh Festivals, Sydney Opera House, Sydney Festival, Sydney Writers' Festival, TEDx, Penn Festival NYC, Outset Glasgow, and Glas Performance, and now works within the Development and Alumni Office at the University of Glasgow. Though Lisa can't offer a combination lock for a career in the cultural sector, she does hope to share some ideas about how to begin creating your own journey towards one. And you're very, very welcome, Lisa.
Thank you. Do you know when you hear things about yourself, you think, is that me? First of all, I'd like to say thank you very much for turning up for the talk. I was at the networking session earlier and I found it incredibly instructive and really engaging. So thank you for some of the ideas that you've given me, because the things that Anne was priming you to do, I think we do throughout our entire careers. So you're not just doing it now when you're thinking about your future career in the arts. You're going to be doing it when you get to my age. And I feel a bit ancient sitting amongst you, but I'm still going to situations and think, how am I going to get to the person I need to talk to? How am I going to generate conversation with them? How am I going to basically leave a conversation with a key contact? And then what am I going to do to follow up?
And do you think that's a skill that you've learned, or were you just born with that, Lisa?
I think it's a combination. I grew up in the Highlands and my nana had a bed and breakfast. And so we had this concept. I worked for my nana from the age of about 10 or 11, I think. And we constantly had people coming into her. She had this big kitchen table and there were lots and lots of people always coming into our home, into my nana's home. And so I got really used to a dynamic living environment where I never knew who was going to walk in the door, so I think I developed my conversation skills and my curiosity about people through that environment. And then through working with a vast range of people across the creative sector, I've learned how to speak to people. And for me, it's a muscle within me that I am constantly honing, because each person you meet is different. So the important thing is to listen, and to. A lot of the tips you were giving earlier were excellent about just matching behaviour and really keeping track of people's body language and sort of working out, are they listening to me? Are they engaged by what I'm saying? Taking a breath. You don't need to go on broadcast all the time as well. Just kind of finding your pace, as I'm doing right now, because what often happens when you start a conversation like we just have is that you go up and you peak and you peak because you're nervous. Very, very natural. You never stop being nervous. And I think when you stop being nervous, that's when you sort of stop caring a little bit too. So conversation, it's an ever developing skill, but practice is really, really important. So practicing what you're going to say to people and how you're going to frame things is hugely important.
So thinking about your career, and I'm sure the students will be interested in understanding the jobs that you've had, how did you get those jobs?
So many different ways. Some of it was accidental, and then a lot of it was very strategic. So my parents have always been very interested in the arts, and my dad is a huge inspiration to me because he worked in the corporate sector when I was growing up. But what he did in the evenings, as soon as he got home, had a play with us, and then he got straight into playing music. He ran jazz clubs, he had a radio show at one point. My mum was always into performing arts, so we always had interesting people either around us or we had access to them. And I realised very young that I was never going to follow a kind of linear path. And the school I went to in the Highlands, I remember my careers advice session, and I was good at English, art, home economics. I don't even know if you do that in school anymore. So it's basically cooking, accounts and typing. And so my careers advisor, who was nowhere near as wonderful as you, Anne, said,
thank you.
okay, so you can do all these things. What you should probably think about doing is working in an office. And I remember at that very moment feeling quite explosive and going, I am never going to just be a typist. I'm going to do something quite different. I don't know what it is, but I'm going to do something quite different. And my parents, I'm the eldest of three, and my mum and dad used to go to the Edinburgh Festival every summer, and they'd only go for maybe 2 nights, and I'd be left in charge with my brother and sister. And when they came back, Mum would say things like, oh my goodness, there are productions happening. Your dad and I saw 5 or 6 shows, and we went for dinner and we met these people, we got chatting to folk, and Mum and Dad are not kind of hugely kind of out there confident folk, but they're very curious, they're very open. And Mum said, it's amazing, Lisa. It's where I imagine you having a great time. Little did she know that I would then go, it's where I imagine myself actually having a career. That's what I'm going to do. And so I just decided, I suppose from the age of about 16 or 17, that I was going to pursue that path.
And how did you make it happen at the start then?
I studied communication and marketing eventually at Caledonian. But what I did throughout my degree was I did lots and lots of volunteering and made sure that I was going to see lots of things across the arts. So saw huge amounts of theatre, film, went to exhibitions, just basically got myself to the point where I knew what was going on in the sector so that I could speak about it and form an opinion about things that I'd seen. And then I did all sorts of things. I volunteered for radio, did lots of different journalism jobs. I read back of some of the things that I wrote and they were staggeringly bad, but I tried. And then when I graduated, I got offered 2 jobs in a big PR firms. And my course leader at the time was saying, oh, this is amazing, like you've got 2 positions, this is incredible. And there was a big part of me going, yeah, this is incredible, right, okay, I can't believe that I'm this lucky. I think a lot of the reason that I was being offered these 2 positions was that I'd done a lot of other stuff around my study. And I was like, okay, this is what I should do. And part of it was naivety, part of it was being flattered by being offered something that I just jumped at them. Another part of it was my parents were absolutely delighted. They were like, gosh, she's come through this degree, she's got a job, we're home dry with Lisa, this is it, it's good. And then I chose the firm I was going to go to, and within 6 months of working there, I absolutely loathed it. And I was working on, I won't say the firm's name, but I was working on an account for Debenhams, the big store. And I just thought, is this it? This, I'm not in the arts. What about that dream? What about that thing that you were going to do, Lisa? You seem to have already kind of shelved it because you followed this path. I think a lot of the reason I'd done that as well is because when I was a student, I lived with lawyers. And they all had this very clear-cut path ahead of them. And I envied it because I thought, gosh, you seem to know what you're going to be doing for a very long time, and I'm sort of flailing around just hoping for the best. So all of those kind of constellations of events kind of led me to go, well, you're in this job, it's secure, you've got a salary, but actually you want to work in the arts. So I resigned, and my parents were just, they were disappointed, surprised, all the usual things. My dad said, what are you going to do? And I said, I'm going to go to Australia, and I'm going to see what I can see what kind of work I can get there and just give it a try. And so I did. And when I got there, I'd done loads of bar jobs and worked in clubs here in Glasgow. So I thought, I don't want to do that. Not that I thought I was above it. I just thought I need to do something different. And so I got the Sydney Morning Herald broadsheet, and I looked at all the different arts companies, and I worked out what everybody was doing. And then I started just going to see things. And a lot of it I couldn't afford, but then I found a way to access free stuff. And then I identified the people that I thought were running places and board members and just people who were potentially very influential. And I started handwriting letters to people because email was around, but I just thought there's something very genuine about saying, I've noticed what you're doing, and would you like to have a meeting with me? And sent them off or hand-delivered them. There's a huge amount of naivety. I look back on it and I think that was, quite a bold thing to do, but very naive as well, thinking I hadn't really thought about what I would do when someone said, yes, we'd love to see you. Anyway, long story short, a few people kind of picked up on this and got in touch with me, and I started having conversations, and from there, job offers started coming into view, and I was doing very, very junior positions, initially at Sydney Theatre Company and then Sydney Festival, Sydney Festival is it's like an annual arts festival, international festival, the director of which, Fergus Linehan, he used to be the director in Sydney, he's now the director of Edinburgh International Festival. Very, very exciting place to work, and when I was there they needed somebody to run their volunteers and disseminate information about the festival, and they said, because you're Scottish, you're a bit different, we're going to put you down in the harbour and you can just help people share stories about the festival. So I started there, and then I got to know lots of the people who were working around me, a lot of them were hugely experienced, but very kind to me, and they just kept sort of saying, look, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I just want to work in this world, but I haven't quite identified how to do it. I asked lots of questions, I worked really, really hard. I was the person who was there working when they needed something to happen, if it was stuffing envelopes, if it was answering the telephone, if it was meeting somebody and getting them into the director's office. I made myself somebody who was available to others and knew that I was very much at the bottom of the tree, but just listened and learned from everyone around me, and then from there sort of lots of other things happened as you just described.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Well, I could sit and listen to you talk on all day, but that's because I'm nosy, curious. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up to the students. So anybody got a question you'd like to ask Lisa?
Why Australia?
Because I'm not very gifted at foreign languages, and I knew that it was, and it was somewhere that I'd always been quite curious about as a child. I probably watched a lot of Neighbours, and I wasn't afraid to go there. My sister's a linguist; she's incredible. I'm not, and so I thought if I travel, I need to be able to speak to people comfortably.
Do you think you could have done the same thing without your degree? Do you think the degree helped you, or it wasn't a necessity, or you could have done the exact same thing without getting a degree?
It's a really good question. My degree helped me. It made me feel more confident within myself, and it helped me hone my writing skills. It helped me inquire about things and ask really better questions, and it gave me the time to be amongst my peers and think about what I'd like to do. And I still refer back to it. I mean, I wasn't I certainly wasn't a star student. I was very preoccupied a lot of the time with the different jobs, volunteering jobs I was doing and working, but I still really, really value it. And I look back now, I wouldn't be able to work at the university without a degree, and I love working here. And yeah, I look back on those days very fondly. I don't think everybody absolutely needs a degree, but I think it really, really does help you. It really gives you the leg up that you need.
And I suppose the other thing about having or doing a degree is that it gives you that time to be able to sort of explore volunteering that if you were working you maybe wouldn't be able to do.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, there was, yeah.
Out of all the various kind of little jobs that you've been doing, what was probably your favorite one where your duties were closest to what you really want to be doing?
Another great question.
Can I just repeat that question?
Yes.
So out of all the jobs that you've done, which was your favourite in terms of the duties being closest to what you really wanted to do? Okay.
It's a really lovely question. Thank you. I grew up as I worked, and so initially when I was working on festivals internationally, I absolutely loved it because festivals are such exciting, dynamic environments to work in, and I loved that I was surrounded by ideas and that I was able to have an idea and say, how might we be able to activate this, and pulling people together and collaborating with hugely gifted colleagues. I loved all of that, but then I got to a point where I realised that I was in kind of service mode and I wasn't working closely enough with communities. And a huge passion of mine just is to bring out the best in people. And I realised through festivals, we were doing that largely. So the last festival I was associate director on, we produced 342 events over the course of a week, which was incredible. And we'd work all year to get to that point, and there was a huge amount of work involved in that, from basically getting funding, core relationships with corporates, with philanthropists, with universities, you name it, and then actually getting people, like getting our guests to come to the festival, and then getting audiences. I really loved it, but I started getting to the point I thought I'm quite comfortable here, but what I wasn't doing was working side by side with communities. So I took on a job in Sydney where I started running a community development organisation where we worked with really culturally diverse communities and helped them to tell their stories through digital media and their own languages. And it was the toughest job I have ever done. It felt like every single day felt like a bit of a fight. I would walk up to the building and just think, I don't know what I'm going to get today, because it was a really political organisation. I'd never led anything like that before. I was unusually the only Caucasian person in my team, which was brilliant as well, because it flipped everything, because, you know, like in the other organisations I'd been working in, they were largely white, and I was beginning to really feel that chasm. So that work that I did, I absolutely loved. And from there, I went on to establish a not-for-profit called with close friends. I was on the establishing board, still going, called Sydney Story Factory, which was all about enabling young people to, well, first of all, sneakily do their homework, but then sort of like hone their writing skills and become storytellers. And we work with a lot of Indigenous communities in Sydney, and that really cooked my noodle. I loved that work so much, because you'd see these young folk come in and be really trepidatious and just sort of go, I'm not a writer, I don't know how to communicate, and they were really curled up within themselves. And we would just gradually watch them. I feel really emotional even talking about it. We gradually watch them blossom, and we work with these extraordinary tutors who would draw out the best from them. And I loved seeing people develop their confidence and their voice. And I still think about those students so often. I think, where have they gone? What have they done? Some of them are now published. They went to university. Lots of the young people we were dealing with would never have ordinarily had the chance to even contemplate university. It was just like, I'm just going to get through school and get a job. Well, hey, you know, that's going to be a big thing. That was kind of, yeah, and that's the kind of thing I volunteer in now, and I love.
I'm interested in your description of that organisation, because I'm sure a lot of people are sitting thinking, wow, that sounds like an amazing opportunity, it sounds like an amazing experience. Was there any money in it? Did you get paid, or?
No, no. But it came out of, so it was actually, this is an interesting point about it to illustrate. So the two establishing directors were close friends of mine. Kath had been a literary editor for the Sydney Morning Herald and features writer, radio presenter, done all sorts of things. It was great public profile in Australia and beyond, actually. And Tim had been an opinion writer and editor for the same paper. And they got to a point in their lives where they just we want to do something different. We want to benefit community in a way that we don't feel we're benefiting it right now. And so they were incredibly brave, and but also, again, naivety comes into it, you know. They came to me and said, right, you know how to set up arts organisations. And I said, I really don't, but I can give you lots of advice around how to shape and frame what you're trying to do. Let's work together, and I can advise you on how to activate partnerships, and I can introduce you to different networks of people I have, and we can sort of start from there. So they kind of went on this path. They just said, we've got this idea. They'd been to see, do you know a writer called Dave Eggers? Has anyone come across Dave Eggers? So the idea, there's a great TED Talk, which I can give Anne details on, she can circulate with you, where he talked about the model for, I think, what was his called? It was in San Francisco, it's gone right in my head now. But he's basically opened a series of these writing schools across the world. And what Kath and Tim wanted to do was start their own in Sydney. So at the time, I was pregnant and about to leave my job with a community development organisation. And I just thought, well, this is a way to give back. and it really resonated with me. So I worked really hard on it before we left Sydney, and I still keep in touch, and I still get their emails, and I still think, oh gosh, I wish I was there. Like, we built a Martian embassy. Like, it's this great thing. We got so much for nothing, but for me to have hoped to be paid for that, that would have been really crummy.
So the money for that came from funding, from arts,
from government,
funding,
from corporate, from philanthropists.
So I think when you look at the labour market now, especially since the last recession, there's more of a culture of people starting businesses and starting social enterprises and looking at different ways of working that aren't the conventional applying for jobs and working for an employer like it might have been 15 years ago. If somebody in the audience was thinking, do you know, I think I could do that, I think I could set up an organisation, I think I could set up a social enterprise, what would you say to them?
I'd say do it. So follow your dream, because it's your dream is never actually going to leave you. It's there within you, and be bold about it. And don't. I think in these situations it's really easy to be stifled by the climate, and the arts right now are, funding wise, it's really tricky. Organisations and individuals are really striving very hard to maintain just a subsistence, really, more than anything. But it's about, you're creative, you have huge amounts to offer the world, I'm sure. And it's about believing in that dream and thinking, well, I've got something to give. Why wouldn't you? Because people, when Kath and Tim decided to create Sydney Story Factory, of course there were a few naysayers. But now they're opening their second centre, they have generated millions of support, and it's about you need to believe in yourself, but also there are all sorts of resources that you could access. Speak to people who, like yourself, speak to people who have done it before. Identify people who have created social enterprises and go, right, I really admire you. I'd like to chat to you about something. What if you were me, what would you do? And you'd be surprised at how open people are to being asked about themselves. And I'm just thinking about something like Social Bite in Edinburgh and Glasgow, and that started off as a very, very small social enterprise, and then they did their huge sleep out in, was it November or December, and they've had, Harry and Meghan were there in February. They've their star is on sort of major ascent. They're doing excellent work, but they're very open-hearted about it, and I think you need to trust in that, is that, for every one person who's going to say, no, I don't have time, there'll be 9 other people who will say, come and talk to me, or, yeah, thank you for showing interest. I can talk to you at some point, or other, yeah.
Any other questions?
Hi, could I ask, because now you are as a creator, I don't know, it's like how you see the difference between the creator or researcher, if you have time. I mean, when you haven't been a creative professor, it's like you want to do, I mean, if you want to do the artist or researcher, you think which is the proportion of advantage and disadvantage when you really wanted to do some creative things. Yeah, it's kind of great. Artist and a researcher, how you feel this?
I think perhaps what you're trying to say is how do you manage that? If you want to be an artist, how is that something that's possible without doing? I don't quite understand the question. I don't think so.
I don't know how to say. It's artists normally is for practical things. So research is more academic, you research very specific direction. But because for me is I want to do some practical things, but I also interested in I want to do through the research to do practical things.
So academic research as opposed to working professionally as a creative.
I've never worked in academic research, but I admire it hugely, and I think it has a very important place within the creative sector. So if it's what you feel passionate about, you should follow that path, and not feel that you need to be derailed by what you think you should do. If that's something that you really genuinely believe in, you should follow it. I don't think I've answered your question, have I? We can talk about it.
Yeah. Are there any other questions? Yeah.
So when you're starting um, your career in the creative industries, often that you are trying to set your foot on the door, and you're learning from other people. Like you say that you are trying to make yourself available for anyone on the first place, but when you finally able to observe and learn, and you know that you give your best, and you know that you worth it, in that then you realize you have ability to do more in your in any circumstances that you got from the creative industry that you've been doing before. How can you finally realize, all right, I'm worth it, and I'm not getting people use you at some point, and let them know your value? How do you?
I think a huge component of that is self-belief, isn't it? And we talked about it earlier on, where you have good and bad days, and some days, my partner describes it as, he said, you're in the jet stream, and it's like anything can happen. It's like you're off, you're gone, like there are infinite possibilities around you. And other days, I just don't have that kind of energy. But it's about developing self-belief that it will come back tomorrow or in a few days. It is all there within you. I think I probably worked all of that out retrospectively when I realise some of the things that I've achieved. But to me, humility is incredibly important, because you're only really as good as the thing that you've just done. And I've always really believed that when you go into work, when you attach yourself to something, you really believe in it, do the best you can every day. And if that's working quietly, and some days I have to work very quietly, and I have to sort of study down and drill into things, and other days I'm on broadcast and high beam. It's that's personality. We're dynamic beings, three-dimensional beings, depending on what's happening in our lives. But I always believed I had people that I really looked up to, and I kept them in my vision quite a lot. And even if I wasn't working directly with them, I would still look at them and think, I admire you, and I'd like to be a bit more like you, and how am I going to do that? And then it's about doing things that make you feel quite brave and terrified, isn't it? When I used to think, how will I, at Sydney Festival, the first ever press conference I ran for international media, I was absolutely terrified, because we had, this, what was the guy's name? Joaquin Cortez. He was this really flamenco dancer, brilliant dancer, but hugely demanding. And he came with this big entourage. It felt like there was going to be, he had so many people around him. And at one point I thought, there's going to be like a white stallion coming as well. This is just out of control. And I feel a bit out of control, but I thought, you're doing this because someone's believing in you, and actually you've got to get things happening in the paper, you've got to get it on radio, you've got to get it on telly. And I thought I'd watched other people who'd done my job do it before me, and so I thought, well, how did they do it? And I started doing it their way, and then I thought, no, I'm going to do it my way. And as I developed that style, I developed more confidence, because I thought, okay, my way is working because it's mine, and that was nothing to do with arrogance. That was about trial and error. So I think it's about attitude, isn't it? I don't think when you go in and you're volunteering, I really respect that. I've always respected that as a colleague and as an employer. When somebody, I don't kind of go, oh, you're way down the food chain in terms of your experience, your age, everything you've done. I see it, I can't bear hierarchy. We need it to function, but I always think you must always remember the people beneath you and people above you, but always thank people and sort of be very cognizant of where you are within that career, within that organisation.
Following on from that, do you think it's important to have a mentor?
Always. I've still got mentors. I've always had mentors, and I love mentoring people as well, because I learn as much from being somebody's mentor as I do from learning from other people. And so I've always identified people throughout my career that I've admired and approached them. Just,
Who are they, Lisa? Could you tell us about some of the mentors you've had?
Mentors I've had. So I've had lots of really amazing people. So there was, when I started working in festivals, there was one woman, Virginia, who was the doyen of publicity in Australia. She was incredible. Everybody loved her, and everyone said, "Oh, you know, Virginia's doing it, it's going to be great." And I thought, "Oh, she's so fab. Why would she want to talk to me?" And I thought, well, I see her out and about, and I see her at events, and she seems really friendly. She seems very funny. And so I was at an opening, and I just thought, stuff it. I'm just going to chat to her, and I found a way, like we did in that session earlier on. I found a way to talk to her. And I told her a bit about what I'd been doing at the time in Edinburgh, and I just said, you know, everyone talks about how good you are. And flattery, I had also realised that this particular woman, flattery was something that worked very well with her. And I said, okay, you know, so like, would you have time to have a coffee with me? I didn't sort of ask her, right, will you be my mentor? But I just said, look, I'm basically trying to carve out a career here, and I admire the way you work. Like, I'm curious about your own path. Would you like to spend some time with me? And we did, and I learned a lot from that relationship. I think the important thing when you've got a mentor is how, structuring the time as well. It's not just about having a coffee and shooting the breeze. You need to go into it with a clear identifying, what do we both want to get out of this? So anyone I mentor, I just say to them, look, it's all like, we will have a lovely time together, hopefully. But actually, what do you want to learn? What are the outcomes you want to take away? But I also have to think to myself, why do I want to spend time with this person? What am I imparting? But what am I learning from them as well? Other mentors, lots in the community development. There's another artist, a designer in Australia, Leanne. I always loved the work that she did and the way that she managed to just create magic out of grains of sand, and she would have these huge public exhibitions, and she just was such a mysterious, beautiful creature to me. I would always go and see her work, and I just thought, stuff it, I'm going to ask her, she'll be my mentor, she's amazing. And it's like, some of it it's bold in a way, but also I thought, well, I would say to myself, like, even though I could feel my heart pounding, I was really, really nervous at these things, I'd also think, what is the worst she can say? Mm-hmm. She can just say, I'm too busy. She's not going to say, you're a terrible person for asking me. She's not going to admonish me for approaching her. She's just going to say, look, thank you for your interest, but I don't have the time.
Yeah. Okay, another big question here.
Yeah. When you were in Australia, how do you turn being a foreigner into an advantage rather than something that might hold you back? Because it's very much in arts about personal relationships, and it's a lot of times easier to form a relationship with people from your own culture because there is a certain understanding. So how do you actually turn not being a part of that culture into an advantage?
I think that every culture, you have stories that rest within yourself, and be very proud of who you are and present yourself in a way where you don't feel like the other. And that takes practice as well. And I've got a relatively clear Scottish accent, so people could understand me in Australia. But then I had eventually other colleagues, and people would say, don't understand, they had a Glaswegian accent. So people wouldn't understand what they were saying because it was quite thick. But, you know, you be proud of what you've got to offer, because we're all the other in so many different situations in everyday life. It's about making, what's your point of difference? What can you offer from your background, from your knowledge and your experience that is slightly different from somebody else's? What I realised, it took me ages to latch onto it, but because I was working in communications, I realised that I had a very distinctive voice, because a lot of the people around me were Australian. And so I was so naive, I couldn't work out why if I called a journalist, they'd say, hello Lisa. I think, how do you know me? And it was because it was Scottish, and they'd say, oh, right, okay. And then eventually I thought, okay, that's actually a point of distinction, and use it. And so I used it quite effectively and quite boldly in the end.
Thank you. Yeah.
How are you the best version of yourself? I mean, was it that you were like working so hard, or was it that you were like so dedicated to do the thing that you love? What was it about?
I felt really proud. I love working. I still, even though I don't work so much in the creative sector at the moment, I absolutely love being around interesting people and ideas, and I love the energy of being in those different environments, but also that there's not a straight line. I would never have settled if I decided to become a lawyer. That I would have found that a very claustrophobic environment. As much as I respect it as a vocation, it's not something I would survive very well doing. I'd probably be rubbish at it as well. But so I think be the best part is I am endlessly curious about people. I've got an insatiable appetite for other people's stories and their energies and what we can share between us. And that, I think that kind of positivity, and having to watch that isn't overwhelming in a work environment as well, but I think it served me really well, because each work environment I've gone into, I just think I'm only as good as the last thing I did. You don't go in grandstanding yourself going, have you got any idea of all the different things I've achieved? That turns people off immediately. Well, it turns me off immediately, because I just think, look, we're all trying every day to just do something a bit different and develop our careers and skill sets. And so, look, some days I feel like I'm about 10% of the best version of myself. I just think you are not nailing this today. And those are the days when I just go, okay, I'm not going to be public facing. And it's about being honest with yourself. And I've always been a great believer in just showing that we're all vulnerable, that we all make mistakes. We've all got stuff going on in our lives, in our families, personal circumstances, whatever they might be. That's a human condition. But don't be afraid to show it. No matter how senior you might become somewhere, I've always been just aware of the complexities of being.
I was interested in your straight line analogy there, Lisa. There's a theory of career thinking called planned happenstance, and planned happenstance is where you put feelers out. So you might put lots of stuff out on Twitter, you might connect with people on LinkedIn, you might go to networking events, you might send your CV to different people, and you're not applying to jobs, but you're just putting feelers out, and that's the planning part of it. And then the happenstance part of it is just see who comes back. And then when they come back, it's about having these conversations like you were saying, like what you did out in Sydney. And so does that kind of theory of planned happenstance, creating opportunities for yourself, things come back to you, does that resonate with you?
Hugely. It resonated at the beginning of my career when I just decided this is what I'd like to do. And I was talking to a friend about this over the weekend, where she said, so you worked, because at one point I was working 6 months, or about 5 months in Sydney on Sydney Festival, because you should know that festival contracts are generally always short term. And I was working the other 6 months on the Edinburgh Festival, and in between I do about a month of travel or whatever. And she went, that was quite amazing. And I said, yeah, but I kind of just, it all happened by accident. But then she said, no, it didn't. And I said, no, you're right, it didn't. I actually decided that I wanted, because I didn't like being away from my family for huge chunks of time. And so it worked very well for me to be in 2 camps and have a life in both places. And I wasn't a mother at that point, so I was able to travel around and do that. But yeah, I believe that just throw the energy and throw the good energy out there and follow up on it as well. No is not always no, and not back or a setback is not always a not back or a setback. It's just a diversion, and you have to think differently about how you might do things another time. But I'm a great believer in that. Put the good energy out there.
See what comes back.
Just one short question about the festivals. How far in advance do you plan? Because when you have those moves, 5 months here, 6 months there, how far in advance do you know where you're going, when you're going?
I did. Well, so I was really, really lucky in that I secured a long-term contract and visa through Sydney Festival. It's the first time they'd ever done it, and again, it was a bit accidental, to be honest. I had just then embedded myself within a couple of years within the team there, and my visa had run out, and my boss at the time said, well, yeah, I think there was partly in him, he was a bit lazy. He's thinking, I can't be bothered training someone else up. I've got Lisa here, and she's cracking, and we get on really well. He said, look, let's get this visa thing sorted for you. Another part of it, he did believe in me. He was terrific. But I yeah, I was really lucky in that respect. So I knew from, particularly with Sydney Festival, I knew that every 6 months I'd be going back to Australia. So I did that for about 7 years before I went there permanently. Festivals, it depends what kind of job you're doing. So festival programming, as soon as you finish programming a festival, you start programming the next. Most importantly, you start fundraising for the next, because you can't, without finance, you can't mount anything. In terms of how festivals plan, like the Edinburgh festivals, for example, they started employing press teams, I think probably about a month ago. They employ front of house staff around now. All the adverts are going out. So they're always thinking about, and it's a very, very set structure within festivals where they know what they need in terms of people on the ground. So they have these very, very sort of tried and tested systems, I think. But do some exploring around them, and I'd be happy to talk to you about it in a more, on a deeper level, if that helps.
Hi, Chris. I don't know whether you will stay in the following session, but I may leave now. So could I ask a quick question?
Of course.
It's about do you think you should do, I mean, as a person, should do the creative things as early as possible when this person wanted to do an artist as an artist, rather than finishing the researching things, for example, some PhD or something, then go back to do the creative things?
I think they fuel each other, don't they? So I think it's really important to do creative things aside from doing the research, because I think they inform each other. So I would advise you absolutely, because it keeps you, it activates that muscle within you, so you're not just constantly sort of lost in the study and the research and the analytical side of things. You're actually exploring new ideas and you're responding to the world around you in quite an immediate way. So I would advise you to try and augment your research study with doing creative things, and it will also make you feel less like you haven't produced something for a long time. So there's not such a big gap, and you just think, how do I do this? And I speak to artists all the time who have either writer's block, creators, painter's block. It happens, but the way to keep yourself very active and creative is to keep making work.
Okay. Can I just ask another wee question, Lisa? What challenges do you think, thinking about the state of the creative and cultural labour market just now, what challenges do you think students face going into it?
I think there's a really obvious one that we talked about earlier, which is a very competitive. It's very competitive to get into the arts, but the more that you can find yourself being singled out, is like getting as much experience as possible, coming to things like this. I think this is a fantastic Anne and Karen program's a really brilliant couple of days where you can hear from people and start thinking about, well, what could I do? Because I still learn through example. I still learn through hearing other people's stories and being inspired by them. I think be prepared to augment your career with other things. So you don't, initially when you start working in the arts, in fact, I don't think I've ever gotten paid huge amounts of cash. That's not why I embarked on a career in the creative sector. But just when I started out, I was always working in bars or restaurants on the side just to augment my salary, just so that I thought, well, I'm going to do this. My dad, actually, hilariously, he still couldn't understand, like I'd been to Australia for a little while, been in Edinburgh, and he's like, I still don't understand this whole thing. Like you're running press offices at the Edinburgh Festival, and you seem to be getting paid about 10 pence an hour. Like, what is that all about? You're qualified, you had this great job. And I said, look, Dad, come and work with me for a day. That's the only way I think I can educate you, because it's because of you and Mum that I've developed an appetite for this world. But now I'm here, you don't seem to be accepting it. And he was laughing, and he went, okay. So he came into the press office and he hung around, and he just got a sense of the vibe there, and how many artists were coming and going, and how dynamic the environment was, and how reactive I had to be. And he sort of went, I understand it now. Yeah. So I think it's be determined, like ask yourself, what do I really want to do, and hold on to it. You talked earlier on about creative enterprises, but my colleague Janice said a really wonderful thing earlier on, where we were talking about this session, and she said the great advantage that all of you have is that you're leaving university either this summer or whenever you do, with you have huge amounts to offer the market. So believe in that. Don't just, I can learn huge amounts from you. People who are, age is something that is inevitable for all of us. Can't turn back the clock. But what I always think about is I want to learn from people who are doing things differently to me, who have learned in a different way, who have different life experiences. So be really proud of what you've got to offer, because I think that's where your self-belief and your confidence is going to come from. Try not to be afraid of, I even listening to you reading through my CV there, I wasn't actually joking when I think, God, did I really do all those things? And I'm not, it's just, I think, yeah, I did. And I think, how did I do it? I think I worked really, really hard. And I also did, it took me a long time to do it, but I got better at self-care. Festivals can chew you up. I would work 6 days a week, crazy hours. Didn't look after myself, got quite sick once, and my doctor just did that thing to me.
He was allowed in that situation.
And just went, you are burning yourself right down to the ground. What's the point? No one cares if Lisa doesn't turn up tomorrow. I was going, yes, they do, because we've got to get this deal done. And then Mary said, no, they don't. You have to have a more rounded life. And it was really full-on advice, but it was brilliant. I also played hard. I love going out and speaking to other people, and some of the best conversations I've had have been accidental and being in a bar at the right place, right time, when you don't realise it when it's happening, but then you reflect back and go, oh yeah, that's when that little constellation started forming. So yeah, be open to opportunities and experiences that come your way.
I think that's a lovely note to sort of go towards our ending on, Lisa, but there's one final question I'd like to ask you. So thinking back, not that long ago, obviously, to when you were a student. So thinking back to when you were sitting on that side of the divide, what advice would you go back and give yourself?
I would say, be brave. Don't ever forget to thank the people who've helped you along the way. Be true to yourself, and don't get I'd say, Lisa, don't get toppled when it doesn't all work out as you kind of fixated your mind on, because it will work itself out. It will work itself out if you want it to. But I would say just trust yourself. I trusted my instincts. My nana always said to me, your greatest skill is that you're curious about people, and she was so right. Yeah. Because actually it was curiosity that got me to where I got, career-wise. So believe in what you've got, because I'm sure within the room, I don't know any of you, but I'm getting to know you. Sure, there is huge talent. The fact that you've turned up to these sessions speaks volumes to me, and so believe in yourselves.
So I think on that uplifting note of be brave and believe in yourself, thank you very, very much, Lisa. On behalf of all students, thanks for coming to speak to us. We really appreciate it.